Call the meeting to order here at 10:08. We're short a few folks up front here. We expect hopefully Robert and Eric still to come. And we've got an agenda. We haven't met since November 19th. Is this my understanding? I'm going to. I just wrote out our new agenda here, and I'll do my best to get through it. I forgot my glasses, so I'm kind of running literally a little blind. Maybe. That's all I need, just simple ones. Cool. Thank you. I also could use a couple $1 million. Anybody have that?
As long as you're asking. Is that joke still funny?
Which joke?
What did they ask them for millions?
Yeah. Hey, thanks. These are the work. Perfect. I'm going to have to come up with a new excuse now. Give me a minute. Just it's a new year, and we've come a long ways, and generally as a working group for the county, I think we've been deemed successful. So that's good, and that I would say is because we didn't just come together and rubber stamp silliness. We fought out the issues, and we worked to come up with what we believe is the best compromises along the way, and some have moved left, some have moved right, and we've got what we think is policy that we can kind of stand behind, defend, and move forward with. So hopefully that's the conversation you guys are all hearing out there, and we're going to continue to do our best. I'm guessing that 80% of our work is over, generally. Good, we're getting a nod. And this is the year that we're going to wrap it up. And I don't know what the wrap up quite looks like or feels like, but one of the supervisors I recently spoke to, said that we needed to get to the TPC part, which is really, in their opinion, everything outside the coastal zone, and kind of get that wrapped up. And that's our next piece. As I read through our agenda, it doesn't really explain it quite like that, but I'm just kind of getting that on the table. So with that, is there any other comments or updates that we can get started with?
Well, I don't know exactly when you want to do this order-wise, but I took the basic details that the working group came up with for the outdoor cultivation ordinance to the board, and wanted to talk about some of their questions. I'm going back again tomorrow to flesh out a larger conversation with the board about it. But they brought up light pollution and electricity. Two things that we didn't really discuss. And so if we think the proposal's fine the way it is and we don't need to address them, fine. But if you wanted to come up with something about those, I could take to the board tomorrow. I also, as far as kind of where this is all going, I had hoped to actually draft the ordinance by today and distribute it. Instead, what we're running into is that I think we're having more complicated CEQA problems than we anticipated as we try to dig into specifically the rezoning to AF issue. It's not going to be covered by the exemption that the state gave us for cannabis because it's a broader issue than just cannabis. And while I think that our general plan will either be a very light touch amendment or none at all, I think the rezoning is going to cause us problems. So tomorrow I'm going to tell the board, I'm going to walk them through it all, what the AF rezone will look like, what the changes, why the changes, how this ordinance would play into it, and then what we're looking at as far as CEQA. And I don't know exactly what it would cost, but I want to warn the board that when we get into the initial study phase of CEQA, we need to find some data and some things And you gauge the board's appetite to fund it. And since, we're halfway through the fiscal year and we haven't funded it, it might be we work on this ordinance and we kick it around and we think about it, but there won't be money to do the real bulk of CEQA until next year, if the board funds it at all. So as far as this job being 80% done, I think you're right. I think there's going to be like a pause. Like we draft the ordinance, we go through the CEQA process, and we hope that we can get something together maybe end of the summer. I think that should still give people time to start getting permits and have grow operations for the next spring. But those kind of CEQA issues are like staff level things. They won't be things we work on here. So I think, and Jesse, if you had any other takeaways from what the board said at the last meeting, I got light and energy. Those were the things that I thought were kind of unclear in our ordinance, and I think we should talk about.
Yeah, I'll take a second to look back at those notes. I just had one question about what you were just saying, just for clarification. That agricultural forestry rezoning. So the CEQA issue is not so much with the general plan amendment, it's with adding different uses to the agricultural forestry zoning.
Yeah, so we talked about the that implementation policy in the thing, and I think if we took the strict approach and said, okay, we're going to do this in a way that doesn't trigger a general plan amendment or CEQA, we could, I think, by making it as restrictive as possible. But since we really want to introduce an industry into timberland, I think we've got to basically do an initial study where we're looking at air, water, waste, roads, the cumulative impacts, the social and economic and energy impacts. And since we don't really know what those are going to be, we need to kind of acquire some resources.
Okay.
Could be really expensive. It could not be. If we can kind of, like Humboldt did a pretty intense EIR, and we can look at that and see if it's helpful. But I think it's going to be like Heidi and Taylor, figuring out when they see the ordinance and what it's going to look like when they look at the rezone.
Okay.
So I just want to kind of prep the board for the unknown, so I'm not overselling this thing that might not be as quick or as cheap.
So another question is then the general plan amendment or not that may or may not be required to allow rezoning of a parcel from say PO to AF, that process could take place before the CEQA study, just as an independent thing separate from cannabis?
We'd have to be careful because you can get a lot of trouble for separating out a CEQA project for piecemealing, even if it's unintentional. If later it looks like, well, we did the minor general plan amendment and then we did an ordinance and we did rezones, and each one of them we found some way around CEQA, but when you look at all of them together, we wouldn't have. So maybe is the answer to that question, but we'd want to be kind of conservative about it. I think the issue with the general plan is that the timberland description, as we've talked about, is kind of really odd, that you can do mining and things. I think it's some small fixes, but what those fixes that might be small in the general plan mean is a fairly significant rezone of PO to AF, that if we didn't allow, a cannabis industry to kind of sneak into that rezone, it might not be a very big CEQA issue. But
right. That's all I meant is that I think, for our timberland, it's a good move regardless of whether or not we have an outdoor cultivation ordinance at all. So I think that part is worth moving forward on. It's good for, the owners of those parcels. It's good for the community, I think, to add more uses to that land, even if it ends up in the future, because there's other agricultural uses besides cannabis. that could
Well,
be utilized.
well, I think that is another kind of major theme that I want to address with the board tomorrow, and that is, you know, if we are going to open up timberland to other uses, you know, maybe instead of this narrow cannabis conversation, we're talking about kind of an existential, what do we do with our timberlands in a post-timberland economy? Like, you know, maybe this is a bigger community discussion than a couple of 10,000 square foot greenhouses, you know what I mean?
Sure, yeah, hemp is the next question, and that's an ag product, and then we're talking every other agricultural operation that's feasible.
Yeah, and so that, you know, is a major general plan issue where we come together as a community and decide, is that how we want to use that land? And if it is, we're talking about massive conversions and an expensive EIR. I don't want to be like hopeless and say, well, if anything's expensive, we're not going to do it. But, you know, to be realistic about it, if things are expensive for a little community like us, it's a big hurdle. So I think the ordinance the working group has come up with is a good one, has pretty minimal impacts. I have been looking through like water quality's new policy and stuff, and I'm a little worried that it's just gonna be really hard, even if we get through this. There's gonna be an individual SEQA review on every permit, and there's a lot. I'm just wondering if it's really gonna happen, if people are really gonna be able to get permits on timberland.
From the state, you're asking?
From the state. I mean, economically, right? I'm sure you can get them.
Oh.
Are you going to be able to get them in a way that allows you to run a profitable business? You know, I don't know. I think it's going to be a tough...
It's none of your business, Joel.
Well, if we amend the general plan, do a massive rezone, do SEQA review on an ordinance, and then no one can get a permit, you know?
That's why I'm talking about the broader uses that ag forestry zoning brings to timberland parcels, because the PO zoning is kind of a baloney zoning. It doesn't even belong in the general plan.
Right.
It constitutes the majority of our privately held timberland.
That's an issue that we do need to fix no matter what, right?
So,
And that's why kind of the cannabis exception for CEQA is too narrow, because we have a much broader issue to address. But ag and forestry is tough because of water primarily. I mean, even in the last general plan EIR, the significant issue in timberland was groundwater resources.
sure. Yeah, it's not going to be traditional ag. It's going to be something that's going to look very much different, that may include a tourism element or a specialty element or something like that, which is perfect for our area. And it's difficult to do any kind of development in those zonings because you can't move a stone without a use permit. So it gets really difficult. And we do have a light definition for guest ranch right now, but it's not a very good one. We don't know really what it means, what you can do with it, what you can't do with it, those kinds of things. So I think there's room for creativity, and we ought not, put a box around what people may or may not be able to do with their land and with their creativeness. So
the problem is the bigger, there's got to be a box, right? There's got to be a box on
Sure.
what to do. But the bigger the box, the more
thanks, Joel. That's a good way of putting it.
the more environmental impact you're looking at. And then the more we have to analyze and the more we have to, I mean, the way you get through this is you say, yes, we're going to change the uses, but here are the things that are going to mitigate the environmental impacts so that we are not causing whatever significant impacts. And if you look at the last EIR for the 2003 General Plan Amendment, pretty much everything in there was, the impacts were rendered less than significant due to some policy that's in there, right? Like minimum lot sizes and things to protect conversion. But what you're really talking about is conversion of timberland to coexist, right? We have lots of timberland that's not really economically productive timberland. It could be economically productive ag land. But the impacts of that are possibly really significant. And it's just, they have to be analyzed and then put out there for comment.
Mm-hmm.
every other government agency and the tribes have a right to be involved in that and comment. And that process just gets long. A lot of people to make happy. It's just, you know. Heidi, you looking at me? Do you have something to say?
No, I was just listening.
So,
Joel, I have a question, kind of back to the CEQA concerns that you were drawing out, and I'm up here cheering, but I'm really talking about, that's not, I mean, that was more of a joke. Is there, do you have some solutions, some tweaks? What can we, this group, do now that would either make the box bigger or make the process smoother?
I think so kind of fundamentally, every impact should be mitigated on a permit by permit basis, right? Because it's a discretionary permit and we put the things in the ordinance, and I think maybe with the exception of light and energy, it's a really good ordinance. But when you do seek review on a programmatic level, there's potential impacts that any one permit wouldn't have, but 100 permits together would. And because cannabis involves two of those most sensitive impacts that are likely to be cumulative, like smell and water, I don't know that there's anything that you can do on a single permit that's going to allow capture of the analysis of the cumulative impacts. So I think the working group has done a great job. I'm very happy with it. It's just that as I sit down and start to write it and start to look at, okay, how's the AF rezone going to look? I'm just seeing that I don't think that it's going to be as easy to do like if we get in and do an initial study and we find out there's some impacts, then we either need to do the full EIR or we need to do a mitigated negative declaration saying that the impacts will be mitigated by X, Y, and Z. And maybe that, I mean, hopefully that's where we're going to go. And I think that once we analyze those impacts, and some of it's predicting like how much is going to happen. And your CEQA baseline is people growing illegally. And there's like all these things that would go into it. And so I just want everybody's expectations to be, we have a big process to go through. Just because the board's like, yeah, okay, that ordinance looks good, doesn't mean we're done. We're not out of the woods yet. But I don't, to answer your question, I don't think there's anything really that you can do.
Okay. I have like two other comments, really. You know, minor update or major update. You know, the new farm bill is now kind of out and exposed, and hemp is a piece of that in terms of an ag product and stuff. And I don't know how much of that's new and how much of that's old, but we're clearly moving in that direction or this direction. I'm also going to be at the American Farm Bureau convention next week, or this weekend, in New Orleans, and so we'll hear more and more about that. The other thing, and I don't know how pertinent this is, I got a new screensaver on my computer my son loaded. It's a set of our cows grazing on the hillside in the back. And I asked all my family, you know, where's this from? Where's this from? It took me a long while to figure it out, a few days. And the importance of this is I used to fly to Portland quite often with Hank Westbrook, and he taught me a lot about what the trees look like from the air going across the state of Oregon. And it was clean agricultural production. Monocultures, right, granted, not always the best, but from a crops point of view, it was good. So this picture on my screensaver, as I finally realized, it's not in Del Norte County, it's in Humboldt County and on Elk River where we have a small farm. And the hillside is clean. It's really, there's no weedy debris. And so as we talk about growing in these timber zones, the part that's coming to mind is, once I look at the screensaver, then yesterday I go out and I look at the hillsides here in the Smith River Valley, and they're cluttered with what Hank would have called weeds, weed trees. And so as you were talking, Joel, you mentioned, you know, it needs to coexist with the timber production, and I think that's clearly the case. And Joel, or Jesse, you mentioned, you know, the tourism piece. So if we can somehow just get that in everyone's mind, that there is room within, a healthy productive forest of 50 acres or 40s or 20s or 100 or whatever it is to fit in a couple acres of productive, intense production here and there. That's kind of what we're talking about, and it doesn't need to be a complete reworking of the landscape and a complete negative effect on the, the water and light, or the water and energy, or the water and resources. So part of our goals here with this committee, and I'm, speaking to the choir here, was right to put parentheses around the cannabis business in Del-Norte County. And I think we've kind of done that through osmosis. We now understand that, it needs to be small enough to where it's really comfortable for all of us that don't want it, us that want it, and then keep out the major competition. And yet it needs to work. And so I'm just kind of putting that out there. So there is a way to work this, weave this into the fabric of the landscape somehow. Not on the hills that we can see from 101, but the backside of them.
So what is the issue with our weeds? I mean, is that because there's not enough grazing to keep it down, or what's the deal there?
They're not weeds.
Yeah, well, so we're talking conifers versus deciduous type trees, and so it's a combination of brown and green that I'm seeing from a distance. Now, I'm not...
It's our distinct soil dispersion. We have a lot of serpentine soil systems that produce...
Different than Humboldt has?
Yeah, way different.
Really?
Way less calcium, and I mean, the soil dispersion is stark. You can move just a little ways, and you can go from productive type soils that support marketable timber, and then you move into serpentine, calcium devoid soils that support manzanita and huckleberry and azalea and rhododendron. And there's the trees that are 150 years old, they're about this big around, and they're rotten in the middle. And those lands can never support timber. They're much better used otherwise. So the cumulative effects are completely understood, that you can't do that on an individual basis. You can't see that. It requires studies. And then in terms of timberland conversion, or conversion of use in terms of how the state sees it, if you cut a tree and then change the use of that land to something, that's timberland conversion. They don't care about the zoning or where it is or whatever. That's timberland conversion. But I think on that same note, if you're utilizing areas where you're not cutting trees, or at least you're not interfering from a forestry standpoint with productive timber, that's not defined as timberland conversion in the same way. It's utilizing of existing open space, and then existing agriculture. I don't know where that goes with the state, but our general plan does mention utilization of existing agriculture in timberland.
So I agree with everything Jesse said. I wouldn't argue any of that. I would add to that by saying what I'm talking about is production or productivity that's, you can hang your hat on and be proud of, and then, somewhat managed, exactly, managed, and then a bit of wasted land, wasted area, and that's me as a intense agricultural production guy saying wasted, so you take that with a grain of salt. But if you're going to grow trees that really don't grow, or shrubs or bushes or whatever, you're really not growing grazing. You asked about is it open land, is it what? I've got 250 elk or 70 elk that come down to my ranch. They literally moved out of the hills. The elk have moved to the coastal plains now because there's not adequate grazing, I assume, green grass that they like to graze on. And so they've been on our ranch now for 9 years or 8 years, and they vote every day that this is the case. So I'm just bringing this up because as we talk about this, and if we have a chance to influence direction and policy and management, I think this is the kind of stuff that needs to be included. That's my contribution to this effort.
I agree with everything that's being said, and I've been on plenty of those plane trips with my Uncle Hank that Blake has been on. And it's kind of to the point where timberland conversion was done naturally without timberland conversion being done managed. And if you're flying from here to Portland, you see a lot of beautiful stands of trees that have been clear-cutted, and now they're growing like a crop of corn. They're beautiful. They're in another crop that's taller or whatever. You can see green, 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 green. You come and fly over Crescent City down to Humboldt, you get into a lot of spots that are green and brown and different colors, and it's because of the fact, one of the bigger facts, like he had said, the conifers, and they started growing alder instead of growing a nice Douglas fir because nobody went in and managed the product when it was growing. They didn't cut the alder down and let the Doug fir be able to get up and have a manageable stand. So it can happen with Douglas fir and alder. It can happen with grassland and something being shaded out. And so what I think Blake is saying is, whatever we consider, let's consider managing it instead of letting it just naturally go up and do its own thing. And you're going to get a whole bunch of different species competing. And
Something Heidi and I were talking about last week. You know, we have these parcels that are much smaller than the general plan says is ideal for timberland. You know, I'm wondering if that actually has played a big role. I mean, is green diamond land more likely to have been managed, whereas these 5 and 10 acre parcels, you know, aren't being managed as a, you know,
Right.
with a timber harvest
Generally,
plan?
yes.
What I've noticed is that the areas that are divided up like that are areas that are naturally not suitable for timber production of marketable species. It's just the natural dispersion. It doesn't really have anything to do with management. Try as much as you want. You're not going to grow Doug fir in rocky serpentine soil. It's not going to happen. So that's what I've noticed. And then the prime timberland has remained in large tracts for tax reasons, for all these business reasons. And the stuff that isn't gets cut up into little pieces and, you know, sold to people for different purposes for a much higher value per acre than timberland is, because, you know, just a tax lot has value regardless of what size it is. And that's what I've noticed, the pattern of the cut up. And it happened a long, long time ago, a lot of it, so nobody has any answers as to the logic behind the arrangement of the little parcels.
Yeah, we were looking, and it looks like it happened before even the 1976.
Yeah, there's no record. 20s, a lot of it. And,
Yeah.
So,
You know, if we're talking about kind of a natural conversion has already happened, or about kind of a managed forest, you know, when you get into CEQA, you're also looking at, like, as a habitat.
that's what I was thinking. Habitat and the biodiversity is what comes to mind here when we're talking about these particular regions. And that's kind of what makes them special, in my opinion. That's what I love about the mountains where my place is, you know, north of the Smith River, kind of North Fork zone. And that's just, it's what I like. What makes it different about Humboldt, Mendocino, it's the forest is like a monocrop. The forests are the same. You walk for miles and miles and it's the same stuff, you know. I'm exaggerating a bit, but here there's just much more biodiversity. There's more habitat. There's more competing species. And so it makes it interesting to be in the forest. And protecting those things, you know, is really important. That's what's special about the Smith River watershed, why it is the way it is.
So if we didn't have these general plan zoning PO issues, we would just add cannabis like we did with agriculture, and then it'd be analyzed on each individual permit. Because we kind of weren't in a position to do that. You know, the environmental review is going to have to look at what introducing cannabis as a legal operation is going to do to all those species, to the habitat. And maybe it's not that expensive. Maybe the information, or the data can be come by. I just don't know. I just don't know what exactly it's going to look like. I don't know if Heidi has a better grasp of kind of what it might cost, or who might be able to do it and stuff like that. But
I'm sorry, you said for the EIR?
yeah, for the initial study to see you know, where we're going to find out about the impacts to the habitat. you know, and.
Yeah, my guess is that we would go through the CEQA checklist, kind of figure out which areas need special study, and then we would put out an RFP to hire a consultant to collect the data. And it would likely be, you know, a planning consultant who would do that, and they might sub some of it out depending on, you know, what types of information would be needed, but
Any gut feeling on cost?
no, I don't.
You'd have like biologists and foresters and all of this
Yeah.
involved, right? Gotcha.
Yeah, I mean, it could be.
Fish and Wildlife maybe, or state agencies involved in that?
Well, they certainly would be.
They'd comment.
They would be
right?
definitely
They'd be watching.
commenting as, you know,
But it would,
under
it would largely, that consultant would then go and find studies and data that's been compiled, right? They're not going to go out there and create new scientific data, are they?
But, well, they're going to do, they're going to go out and evaluate.
Right.
And do a count and an assessment. And we do that all the time.
Yeah, I mean, I think there would need to be some new data created. I think that what you mentioned last week, you know, looking at what Humboldt County did, I mean, it would be very similar. So whatever methodology that they followed, I would think we would be similar to that. But I would think there would have to be unique data because obviously it's a unique location.
It's not a lot to draw from.
Yeah.
Like, but no, it's little things like we got a timberland conversion permit exemption, and so we had a forester come out and he didn't do a study per se, but he checked some boxes on a checklist and determined that the study wasn't
Biological
necessary.
assessment.
Sure, you know, so I don't know if the
So I guess,
there
you
aren't a
know,
lot of those kinds of things even though.
in order to do a mitigated negative declaration, we need to be able to say, here are the impacts that this will cause, and here's how we are going to mitigate those. Whereas the full-blown EIR is going to, you know, be a lot more intense.
Gotcha.
So if we can find, I think this specific cannabis program we're talking about here is pretty limited. If you also add in all the requirements from the state, it's actually very limited. You know, the water quality new policy looks pretty rigid to me. Because
Yeah.
especially because we're talking about, I think would be a tier 2, I think is in their thinking, is where you can't just be exempt anymore. You got to get the permit. And I think we're right there with outdoor and size. So I guess, you know, we'll just go through it and see what happens.
So for this committee, should we forget to try to say something like AF, because that's something that you as the county needs to do? Or do we go on the zones that we have control of and know of now?
Well, I think it has to be AF or a new zone completely. Like, I don't think that we could do it in TPZ without a general plan amendment. And I don't think that we should do it in PO because it's already inconsistent with the general plan. So I think AF is kind of by default the place that we can do it. And so that's kind of where we need to work.
Yeah, we don't need to worry about zoning. We just want to worry about, I guess, the details, the functional details.
Well, that's what I was getting at. We don't have an AF zoning yet, so we can't say that it would go in an AF area if,
Yeah,
We do have AF zoning, just not very much of it, and we
Yeah.
don't have the uses haven't been
Sure.
settled.
As far
Yeah.
as location, you would just imagine the places that could theoretically be rezoned, so that would be PO, and then, you know, TPZ that could be rezoned, you know, for a variety of just things that make it possible or not.
I think, you know, the most probably practical thing to do right now is talk about light pollution and renewable energy.
That and water, you were asking about takeaways from the board. The only other thing was having the water regulations, I suppose, either duplicated or reiterated as a matter of county code so that in the event of lack of enforcement
Yeah.
from the state. I
That's
don't
how
know
we've
if
done
that-
everything, you know.
All right.
I think, you know, the state will let you do surface water diversions and kind of right now in the ag ordinance you can't, and we've been thinking you can't. That's a good way to mitigate impacts, but it also might be a good way to kill off the industry. You can do rainwater catchment. I think that might be the most environmentally, I mean, it's that and trucking it in, right? I don't think there's going to be a lot of well water resources.
The allowed surface water diversions have to be diversion to storage because the forbearance period is
Right.
the entire season.
So, yeah, I mean, maybe,
So that'd be the same thing as rainwater catchment in terms of infrastructure, you know, and impact to the environment. You know, winter drafting, I think, is as reasonable as the rainwater catchment.
yeah, so if that's something you want to be the recommendation, is to open it up to basically the most permissive uses that water quality will allow, I'm comfortable saying that those are pretty well regulated and restricted.
Yeah, I think the reasoning for not was just for simplification and to avoid needing to check whether or not, you know,
It's
drafting
easier.
system is-
It's easier to regulate because I don't think water quality is going to come up and make sure you're drafting in the right time.
Sure. But
And
conversely, though, it may be wiser to, you know, if the concern is cheating on drafting times, and so you say, well, you just can't include a drafting system in your plan. Well, that doesn't help prevent somebody from cheating on drafting. It would be better to have the system in the plan so that everyone's aware of it, and then you have a better chance of being able to monitor the time of the drafting.
that could be.
It's like, I
Yeah.
don't know.
On the other hand, like if your plan does involve enough water from an appropriate source, then we know you don't really have a reason to, or I don't know. I don't know about water hauling, right? I don't know that that's, we're already talking about crappy roads, right?
Yeah,
you
that's
know.
totally dysfunctional in my opinion.
Yeah.
I don't think
Yeah, I
that
second
that's.
So
That
we're basically
applies
talking
to-
about rainwater catchment or groundwater if they've got
Yeah.
it, or surface water diversions.
We have a different set of rules for paved access, so we can talk about trucking where you have suitable roads, but I don't think it should be considered on county-maintained, non-paved roads.
The general plan EIR from 2003 specifically recommended that development shouldn't increase in intensity outside of an area covered by a public water system because groundwater resources are so limited. And so when agricultural grazing is kind of included in the general plan, but no other agriculture was for timberland, I think that water use is probably the thing that would trigger like a threshold of significance type thing in an
Sure.
initial study. And so, you know, I don't know how much creek water is available. I don't know these things, but that could be an individual permit by permit thing.
Yeah, it's very site-specific.
Yeah.
Some places you can't get rid of the water, and other places have no water. They can be 1,000 feet apart from one another.
So just, you know, a comment here in regards to what I just heard, you know, it's crazy. We get, I don't know, 50 to 100 inches of rain here, you know, guaranteed every year, sometimes more. And we should be able to divert some of that into something, you know. Unfortunately, it would most likely be these poly tanks that are kind of ugly from everywhere. You know, so if we could encourage storing water in little natural ponds or something would be really awesome. I think that benefits more species, including more people.
State does allow that, and it comes along with a whole set of regulations
Yeah.
about the maintenance of the pond and natural versus invasive species maintenance.
And it may work sometimes, and it won't work most of the time. So, you know,
Yeah, I'm for that.
Yeah.
It's easy to hide poly tanks in the woods, so they're not ugly.
Yeah.
It's a good place.
Okay.
So if I go back tomorrow to the board, is the working group comfortable saying that the recommendation is to allow surface water drafting in compliance with the water quality cannabis policy? Is that everybody comfortable with that amendment to what we've talked about so far?
I think we are, right?
I think that we'll have to make sure that that's also
So another thing is that a moratorium on permits within an area mapped out by the Yurok tribe is also on the agenda tomorrow.
Yeah,
Yeah, I
absolutely.
saw that.
Yeah, we're all behind that. On that subject, this, Humboldt County's been, the example of good and bad and on, giving me direction as to where we really want to go. And one of the things they've more recently done, and I'm hearing this from, secondhand, is, they've got a lot of people that applied for permits last year. They did not allocate them. Lots and lots. I don't know if it's thousands and thousands, but we're talking about millions of dollars of taxable income that the county didn't have an opportunity to tax because they held up the permit. And I don't want to see us get in a situation where we get silly in that regard. We need to, their annual permits, they need to, the reason we're doing all this is so that there's some economic stimulation both to the county and to the community. And so we just need to be aware of that. So.
Yeah, we also need to be aware of that the urgency ship has sailed in terms of outdoor cultivators here being able to take advantage of early market placement or anything. The next 2019 sort of off the table, I think, for production in 2020, hopefully. So I agree completely with what you're saying, and we don't want to fall behind for no reason, but at the same time recognizing there's not going to be any revenue for anybody in this one, till for a few years. But the rest of what we've done, manufacturing, maybe some indoor cultivation, that would be good to find a solution to be able to make sure those permits make it through our system.
Well, those will be a lot easier. We still have to send the whole package to the Coastal Commission for a lot of those areas, but realistically, even for 2020, if we really are trying to capture tax revenue and foster business, making those size restrictions more lenient on the ag and manufacturing might be the more direct route.
Right.
But, I think we're going to wait and see. I think the timeline works, even for CEQA and General Plan Amendment, to have it in place for 2020,
Mm-hmm.
if there's appetite and money. I don't know what's going to cost.
Okay.
So yeah, the surface water drafting question, I'm okay with that. I think it needs to be delicately explained though, so it doesn't sound like because it's sort of a dirty word.
Yeah.
A dirty phrase, surface water drafting, so you have to be careful about that.
Yeah.
But yeah, it is true. The Department of Fish and Wildlife approved drafting operations are really nice and can improve habitat. And then, the state regulations are stringent, so it's really just a matter of, whether or not the rules are enforced, the details are paid attention to, whatever.
Yeah.
So surface water drafting I'm with Jesse. It kind of boggles my mind that I'm sitting here advocating for it, because that has been the real demise of the things like the Eel River in Humboldt, where we farm along that river. I grew up there, and 2 summers ago it was down to a green, mucky trickle, and that had happened for a few years in a row. This year it wasn't quite as bad, according to me, and so that's good because there's more awareness to that. But that's also, that's overdrafting, and that's illegal surface water drafting, and that's why we're talking about it here openly.
It's important to keep in mind our scale. Our scale that we're talking about for our farms is so tiny. These farms can run off the amount of water or less than what would be typically considered appropriate usage for domestic use, what's been defined by the Water Board as your allowed domestic use for your personal use, your landscape, etc., your animals. The amounts that they allow, up to 2,500 gallons a day is standard for just domestic drafting from a riparian right claim. And that's a lot of water, 2,500 gallons a day. You can have a very large farm, way larger than anything we're proposing here. So that scale is important to consider. I don't know if it makes sense or if it's doable to put, gallonage, actual numbers limits on your plan, like 500 gallons a day is plenty of water for the scale of the farms that we're talking about for outdoor cultivation, just to give you a frame of reference.
When, I don't remember seeing this in water quality policy, but what are they doing for cumulative impacts? I mean, if you've got one operation diverting 25,000 gallons a day, it might not be a big deal, but what if there's 30?
They do. There's percentage of stream flow,
Okay.
and then there's total acre feet accumulation. There's reporting with the water board. There's lots of monitoring and reporting. That's what the program is. It's a monitoring and reporting program. And so you're keeping track of it. I don't know where they are with the meters, but they have been pushing for metering. They were.
If you're
requiring it.
somewhere and you've got a little creek and you're the only one on it, kind of how are they deciding what the in-stream flow needs to remain at?
Yeah, they're doing that too. They're doing watershed saturation. So they're allotting permits by watershed, and then the track and trace system, which by the way is not running yet, it's still behind schedule. They're going to limit it that way by issuing only a certain number of unique identifier tags per given watershed. And I don't know the metrics of how they calculate it, but they have lots of data. They claim to know what it is. But here, I don't know that they have a lot of data. I mean, a lot of the streams here are not even, they're not marked. They're not blue line streams on the water board maps, but they're definitely year-round streams. But they're trying to be on top of it. Those things are, adjusted or forefront.
So in my experience, so two things. One is Humboldt County. I remember talking to a farmer friend 5-8 years ago who said, wow, we've got 80 acres in southern Humboldt. This creek there is 100% dried up. It's never dried up ever before. Now it's dry. So it's specific to these little watersheds, and remember, every little valley between two hills is a watershed of some sort. So keep that in mind. Then we farm over in Modoc County, where in a lot of these counties there's a water master, and that's the one person that drives around and visits your farm, visits where, and over there it's crazy because this water's coming down into the salted, I don't know what they call it. There's 3 lakes there between California and Nevada that are just miserable salt flats. And so as soon as the water hits there, it's gone. It's not available for any wildlife or anything. And so there's times of the year where we can divert 100% of the creek, like three 10-day periods, and literally we're talking thousands of gallons a minute, and you can just go out, dam it, send it this way. And then you use weirs to somewhat divert from other creeks, and you pull out a percentage of the water. But the water master is the guru that monitors that, coaches you through it, and makes sure you're not overdrafting and things like that. I have no idea why I'm bringing that up, other than somebody needs to get good at recognizing correct water drafting and surface use and incorrect, fraudulent use.
Yeah.
So the forbearance period, I think, takes care of that. The forbearance period is so wide. It's March to end of November you can't draft. And so I don't know. I don't know of most of the watersheds all of the watersheds that I know of have a surplus and are plentiful between December and March. I don't know. Taking too much of that water would be really difficult. It's like overflow. I don't know.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not a biologist, though. I don't
Yeah.
know, but I think that's the time period where the sensitivity is low, and it's easy to deal with. And I think the reason why they have that, it's been widened recently. It didn't used to be that long. It was like June to October it used to be, but they widened it up just to take care of the problem, because instead of trying to figure out exactly when, how much, it starts to get too difficult to manage it all. And that's why the yield dries up in the summer, because of drafting on a 115-degree day in August. So
yeah. Well, we don't have a water master or we're not likely to like get one. So my question about the in-stream flow is water quality kind of determining kind of what the healthy amount is to begin with, or is that on the applicant? Because I don't want it to be on the county. And if we are, like, we can learn and study and maybe have somebody go out every now and then and see if they're compliant with what water quality decided is the right amount of water for you or something. But that isn't a project that we can.
Yeah, that data comes from your water board permit. That's all part of it. I mean, you could narrow the drafting period even further. If the idea is to just, so let's say it's the same thing as a water collection system. I'm kind of thinking of it like that, you know. Instead of catching it on your roof, you're catching it in a watershed. You know, so if you really want to make it more genuine, narrow it up. Maybe make it, you know, January, just December through February or something, you know, and that's where you're catching, you know, that's where you're filling your reservoir during those months. And then you don't need to ask, you don't need to worry about it. You don't need to figure out whether or not there's enough water, because these stream flows, you know, the stream that may flow at 5 gallons a minute in the summer, that's a sensitive watershed, right? You gotta be careful. You could dewater that stream and kill the wildlife. But in the winter, it's flowing at, you know, 1,000 gallons a minute or something, you know. So it's like, you don't measure that. You don't worry about how much of that you're taking, I don't think, you know. I mean, I guess you could. I don't know. Maybe I'm speaking out of school. I guess somebody could build some big diversion works and, you know, divert all the flow that you need in the winter for flushing.
Well, my question would be, and I'm not in any way knowledgeable about this, but if the natural course is to be very dry trickle in the summer and a torrent every winter, then isn't that kind of what the ecosystem is designed for?
Yeah.
And how much of that torrent can you take away before you're making environmental impacts that have to be analyzed, mitigated, watched?
5, 10%, 25, we don't know, right?
Yeah, and I don't know how we're going to find out is kind of my issue with the initial study.
Well, you're not allowed to draft more than 50% of any stream anytime. That's already, that's not for the winter though. They're talking about this is for low flow times, but I don't see anywhere where it says, but in high flow times you can take more than 50%. I think it just applies all the time. You're not supposed to take more than 50% of the flow. So, I don't know.
All right, well, we'll figure something out.
But I could be wrong. There's a lot of things that I read that I can't remember where they came from or if I actually read that or not. But don't quote me on that.
Okay, well, okay, so I'm going to go into what water quality is requiring with the board. So the board knows that it's not just going to be a free-for-all. And, you know, we'll talk about surface water drafting and see if they're open to that. I think it's probably going to be necessary if anybody's going to make any money out there.
I don't think so, honestly. I mean, we may not even need to be able to talk about it. That's why I didn't bother pressing against it when we first talked about it, because, you know, groundwater wells, which really honestly affect the surface water in the mountains pretty directly, but, you know, they're not regulated yet, you know, and so they can be had. They can be drilled here and they produce decent water and you can store from that. So it isn't necessary to have a surface drafting system at all. And I think the only reason, honestly, the water board is even allowing it at all is because they just can't stop it. They can't shut it down legally. They would gladly in a heartbeat if they could. To say, not doing it, you know, but there's all these built legacy rights, riparian rights, and established water uses that have been filed with the water board. They had a whole program allowing, you know, year-round drafting with all of these really regulated rules, and they've been, you know, allowing that, continuing that for, I think this was the last year, they said they were going to allow that in honoring of the people who participated in the water board program to begin with. But it's really been a slow squeeze out, you know, and I think that it's just they're legally bound to allow some of it, but I don't, and then certainly some operations where it's dug in and big, they are dependent on surface water, but I don't think that here we're kind of starting from scratch. We don't have big operations that are dependent on surface water. It's technically feasible to get it from groundwater or rainwater. And so honestly, if that's the impetus that you're going to kill the business, then don't do it. I don't, in my opinion,
So,
for that.
Joel, I wrote down wise surface water drafting, for the purpose of reservoir filling, so that if you think in terms of that, that tells you that it's not drafting all year, it's just during the, the abundance period and some sort of reservoirs that are allowable.
There's some great ponds, there's some properties in the mountains that have permitted ponds that were built, and they're great water source, and so to disallow surface water drafting would mean that you can't use a pond anymore that's fed naturally. So.
Okay, I think we can probably move on.
Yeah.
Is there comments from our public at this point in regards to what we're talking about? Not yet, all right.
I'm going to step out for a minute, but
Electricity?
electricity and light pollution.
Yeah,
Okay.
got it. Which one first? Anybody have comments on either?
Yeah, Joel needs to be here. Yeah, the light pollution, I think
So-
that's why we're not doing the mixed light, but
So light pollution, it's always been on our radar since day one. We've always talked about it. So
Ag land,
have we
mostly.
missed something that the board's bringing up, or?
Okay, yeah, well, it did actually come up because, and we didn't get into the details enough of it probably, the state tiers out mixed light by light intensity. So we're,
And could you define mixed light again?
yeah, sorry about that. Yeah, that's where you're
natural
using,
versus.
yeah, that's where you're using some artificial light.
Yeah.
And so that's where you have the opportunity to pollute after sunset or before,
Right.
during dark hours. And so the allowance for using artificial light in an outside setting is tiered by light intensity, by wattage of light power. And so we're just contemplating the first tier, which is up to 6 watts per square foot. And we didn't really get much into that. We were just dealing with those numbers because that's what came from the state. But in reality, I think it was Supervisor Hemingson actually pointed it out at the meeting, that that's a lot of light. That really is, if you're talking about a big greenhouse, I think we were talking about nurseries during that conversation. So we were talking about much larger greenhouses than we're talking about in outdoor cultivation. But, in a 20,000 square foot building, in a big nursery building at
Cumulative,
6
it's
watts per square foot, that's 180,000 watts.
Yeah.
Anyway, so the point being that we don't have to, that's more than I use in my nursery. A watt or two I think is sufficient. That helps a lot with preventing the light pollution. The big thing that is, I think, the main driver of the light pollution is just the overpowered lights, the heavy wattage lamps.
What would Kurt Miller's opinion be on this?
You got lights blaring and everyone else has lights blaring and
Yeah.
quit picking on us. We were talking about the tiering of lighting, and Supervisor Hemingson had pointed out that even 6 watts per square foot, if you get big, that's a lot of light. And I agreed that that's the number we were working with from the state, 0 to 6 watts per square foot as a threshold.
Yeah, so 6 watts per square foot
Is a bunch,
for 10,000 square feet.
is a bunch.
Sure.
Yeah.
So it's
a
not
crab boat,
necessary.
apparently.
Yeah, we
JD's
could,
saying that he gets away with, he thinks around 1.
1 or 2, I think, is you could cap it there, and that would help a lot.
Well, there's no real reason except when you apply for that state license under our system, they're going to have to apply for the mixed light license, right?
Sure, yeah.
They're going to have to pay for it either way, right?
Yeah, that
Whether
doesn't
they
matter.
do 1 or 6.
Sure,
So there's no reason why we can't say 1 or
Right.
2.
And is there a difference between a LED watt and a condensate?
a little bit, but they don't address it like
They
that.
don't
So as
separate it.
technology improves,
Yeah.
the
We'll get more light
thresholds-
per watt.
Yeah, things will get brighter, or you'll have to adjust over time. And light technology is changing pretty rapidly, but maybe not. I don't know which is changing faster, light technology or government's ability to adjust.
So is there anything that can be done?
One's positive, the other
One or
one's moving faster.
1 or 2 watts, I think, is 2 watts is more than enough. I use about 1, I was looking at.
So Jesse, are you recommending that we would say 2 or less?
Yeah, because I think it does. That's my gripe with outdoor cultivation and just the mixed light tiers, the
overlay.
higher tiers is, yeah, it really makes a,
And is this basically on nursery?
no, this is for production, for flower production. We're talking about timberland here specifically, but this
Yeah.
could apply, I think, countywide, since we're not doing the upper tiers of mixed light anyway. I think we could apply this countywide and to nurseries maybe also. And then
Well, so if we're looking at mitigation regulations, things that can be done, is there something besides the wattage?
yeah, the blackout curtain systems, and that's something you gotta be careful about requiring because it's really expensive.
What is Humboldt doing about light pollution?
I don't know, honestly. They're allowing all the tiers of mixed light. But I don't know. I mean, I do know that there's lit up greenhouses across the mountains.
So you would guess they're not doing anything.
So either they're not following the rules or they're not doing anything. So either way, it's not working. That's just my way out of the question. 'Cause
Well,
I don't
maybe
know.
they're following the rules at your 6 watts and it's
Certainly.
too
Yeah,
high.
no, I don't know. I'd have to do the research to find out what they're doing. But they have a much bigger thing they have more interests to accommodate in terms of the business that we don't have to accommodate.
What do the lights look like? I mean, are they like down facing with a shade already?
Yeah, they can be, but not always. It's like a translucent greenhouse just it looks like a fluorescent light tube,
Yeah, the whole thing illuminates.
regardless of how you're shining your lights.
Have you driven by the prison at night?
It's better. It works
similar.
It works better when their lights are directed down. It's more efficient for the person paying to run the lights to have reflectors and direct them where you want to put them. But it doesn't mean that's going to happen. So really, I think when they're trying to control it, you require blackout. I mean, that is part of the Humboldt ordinance. I don't know the details of it, the times, the requirements, yada, yada, but there are blackout requirements. There's systems that you can put in place,
So
not on a timer.
if we've got a 10,000 square foot operation with another 10,000 square foot vegetative space, are they going to need more intense lighting? Are we really talking about 20,000 square foot?
Yeah,
where
they
it
can all be under the same,
can all be 2?
yeah, you can get away with that too, yeah. For sure. But yeah, it adds up.
Yeah, I don't know, this is a really good example of the cumulative impact thing. I don't know what, a 20,000 square foot grow with 2 watts per square foot, if you go into a permit CEQA review and there's kind of impacts of that. I don't know what the impacts are really, but if we're talking about the cumulative impacts of lots of those people without really knowing how many it might be, like it might be 4, it might be 100, that's tricky. So kind of the more we can put kind of besides just the actual number of watts coming out, some kind of other mitigating protection, or we could say, yeah, there might be 2 and there might be 100, but they're all going to do something to protect light pollution.
The language I've seen is, you'll have to help me out with it, but it's like down-facing, I can't remember the verbiage they use exactly, but.
I think it is down facing.
Unshielded lamps, horizontal light distribution, I can't remember. I mean, there was some verbal attempt to describe being polite with your lights.
The Coastal Commission's requests for the ag zone, the coastal zone, was down-facing lighting.
Sure.
So let me just kind of just thinking this through. Your example of 20 and 20,000 square feet, and at 2 feet, that's 40,000 watts, right? Or 1,000 little 40-watt light bulbs, right?
Well, at 20, how are we getting up to, how are we getting?
I don't know how he got that.
Oh, you're talking about a 10,000 square foot on pavement grow with a 10,000 square foot supporting nursery, the biggest possible setup.
the biggest possible setup.
Okay, and then
Yeah.
at 2 watts. of
And
foot,
maybe the
30,000.
mitigated negative declaration could say there's not that many properties on
Right.
pavement. But they were still talking about 5,000.
So just cut it in half or a quarter, like you're saying, and it's still, you know, it's, that's a lot of, you know, it could be 500 light bulbs at 40, right? That's a lot, right?
a lot.
And so going from 6 to 2 watts, I don't think is, in my head, just sitting here, is accomplishing much, you know, in terms of mitigating light pollution potentially.
Well, it is 66% less light.
Yeah.
So I-
Yeah.
Yeah,
well,
but kind of what's the threshold of
It's less
significance?
bright, right?
Right.
Well,
But
it starts to get to be not enough. I mean,
What I was gonna, let me just finish
Yeah,
it real
sorry.
quickly. So in addition to this, I think we need the language that then says, you know, not after this time period, you know, whatever, if it's 10 o'clock at night till 5 in the morning or something, I don't, you know, so that there's a shutdown period. But I don't know if there,
that's when you need the lights running though.
yeah, do you need? what,
Do you need them all night?
Hours per day?
Sometimes, yeah.
How many hours per
Sometimes
day?
you need them running all dark hours.
So, you
so
know,
a dark period's not
biologically
practical.
or ecologically, how much light do you have to have before you start bothering animals? Or is it any light? They're used to a dark forest, right?
Yeah, it's, let me just, chickens, right?
Bigfoot.
One candle light, one candle burning in a coop with 50 to 100 chickens stimulates them to lay eggs. So that's the book I read years ago.
Yeah.
So-
Light
so it's not a
pollution
lot.
Can affect wildlife.
Yeah, they're
significantly.
affected by moonlight, right?
Right.
So
Chickens aren't wild animals though, luckily.
they're like, yeah.
But no, I don't
they
know, but I
count.
believe that light, like, kind of just a well-lit, you know, homestead can emit enough light, you know, to affect surrounding wildlife. So it doesn't take much at all.
Are there regulations on lighting your homestead out in those areas?
Not that
Not
I
yet.
know of.
Not yet.
That I
We
know
got a
of.
comment?
I mean, the county generally has a policy as far
On the
as, you know, lights, that lights, regardless of the use, need to be directed downward.
Yeah.
Sure.
So 2 watts per square foot, lights directed downward. That would make,
To start.
yeah, it'd make a, you know,
Sure.
if we go through the CEQA process and we find out it's not enough, we can always say, okay, well, here's a third thing you need to do.
Yeah.
Or something like that.
Right.
I also think there's going to be some, you know, environmental wisdom there, right? Going from 6 to, that requirement's going to force them to use more efficient lighting,
Right.
LEDs and other things, which is good.
Right. I came up with that too. I use 1 watt per square foot in my nursery and it
Yeah.
works. So.
Okay, we'll go here and then there. Thanks.
So a couple of things. One is that, yeah, light can have.
We need to talk into the mic and introduce yourself.
I'm Derek Jensen.
Thanks, Derek.
We'd met before. A couple of things. One is that, yeah, light can have tremendous effects on wildlife, including trees even. So it can, I mean, obviously it can affect marijuana, so it also affects trees who have day-night rest schedules. So, and it seems to me that is measuring it by watts per square foot the appropriate metric? Because I'm wondering if instead the real question is lumens at 10 feet, 100 feet outside. Because if you have 2 watts per square feet or 50 watts per square foot and blackout curtains, that's obviously already mitigated. So it seems to me that the metric by which you want to measure it is not the amount of wattage per square foot down, but actually what happens outside the
effect.
the actual effect, which would seem to be a different measure than 2 watts per square foot. Instead, lumens at 100 feet
Yeah, I think
outside.
the reason the state does, you know, watts per square foot, and it's just for simplicity and like technicalities. You know, it's simpler than
Well,
having pioneering.
if we did lumens at 100 feet, how would we do it? What would it
Right,
look
that's
like?
what I mean. You have a light meter, and you have some standardized process for measuring the light and all of that. So that's another thing that the state didn't want to come up with. They didn't want to come up with a procedure for measuring light and standardizing that. It's much easier just to say watts per square foot.
You can measure that
So-
during the day, The other one you
Sure.
have to measure at night,
So I agree with what you're
when
saying.
the moon's right.
If we could do that, that would work.
My whole point is just
But-
that 50 watts per, I mean,
Yeah.
people blackout curtains right there.
Mhm.
A million watts per square foot inside here is different than.
It also has to do with the reality of enforcement. It's the reality of things on the ground are that, you know, for all the requirements you make, people don't necessarily follow the rules. So if you have an allowance for unlimited lighting, then the person doesn't feel like pulling the curtain, you know, only a couple nights a week.
So,
It just doesn't work, you know. And so this is like the starting point for our grand experiment, you know. And as we learn that people can be responsible and they can pull their curtain, you know, and it's not that expensive, then we could up it, you know. But I think it's
so Derek, here's my take on it. I think your comments are you know, a bit of an aha for me, light bulb went on, yeah, that is that's the problem we're trying to address, is the lumens that are being eliminated or illuminated, you know, to the neighborhood. And so that would be the best measuring tool. However, I think we're just recognizing that it may not be the most practical.
So I guess with like the downward facing, you would think would
You
limit.
still have to go with a few of those things.
Yeah, something that's going to limit the lumens instead of obviously the watts.
It's like the smell thing, though, you know.
Yeah,
right.
It's a little bit difficult to quantify, although when you see it, you know what you're looking at.
Right.
You know?
Okay.
yeah.
We have another comments over here.
I didn't know you guys changed your days. Hi, Linda Sutter, County. I watched a documentary about 2 weeks ago, and it was in regards to the Emerald Triangle and how the growing has affected the animals, especially not so much for the light part. I didn't hear anything about that, but as far as the substance they use for to keep out rodents and whatnot else. So I have a concern about that. I don't know if there's anybody here that's an environmentalist, but I think that I would talk to somebody that knows a little bit more about it, especially including the light factor, to see how it does affect the wildlife, because you want to make it amicable between everybody. Thank you.
Cool, thank you.
Yeah,
I am an
pesticides.
environmentalist, go on record as saying. Yes. I'm not a extreme activist, but I am absolutely an environmentalist, and I say that with 100% sincerity, so.
Rodenticides and pesticides have been a problem traditionally, especially with illegal grows, or, you know, not just grows, but.
So I can weigh in on that one a little bit. Justin Riggs, Agricultural Commissioner. Anybody who gets a permit is going to have to report their pesticide use, so we will be able to monitor that pretty closely. They'll be subject to headquarters inspections, you know, spot inspections during reasonable hours, all sorts of cases like that. So I think we'll be able to keep a pretty good eye on that on the legit grows.
Right. It seems, I kind of remember somewhere some effort being made to eliminate the use of rodenticides entirely, not just, you have to be careful with them, but they can't be used. That might not be true, but.
Are you talking in a cannabis setting? Okay.
Cannabis setting.
Yeah, I'm not sure about that. In general, some of them, they're increasingly becoming more restricted.
Sure, maybe it was particular types. Maybe it was particular types of rodenticides that they were disallowing somehow. But important point.
Thanks.
So yeah, I'm not sure how to develop further light pollution controls. I mean, just light intensity is the easiest. More specifically though than watts, I mean, you could get into like lamp lumens. I mean, that data is around, you know, but that's, I don't know, instead of looking up the number of watts that somebody's system is using, you could look up the number of lumens that somebody's lighting system is supposed to produce, and that gets you a little bit more accurate than watts per foot, but I don't, it'd be the same thing though, really. Doesn't vary that much. Lighting technology doesn't vary that much, especially if you're in the mountains off-grid. You're going to be using the most efficient lighting available, which is the most lumens per watt.
Okay, so let's talk about that then. How are we powering these?
Yeah, that's another way that's going to limit it. You're not going to run 40,000 watts out in the woods. You know, that example is going to be an on-pavement, probably an on-grid system. Off-grid, you're going to be using fossil fuel generators, batteries, hydropower.
So
That's
some
about your options.
solar, but not.
Well, there's no sun at night, so no solar. You might charge your battery with solar,
Right.
but you're not going to run your lights with solar.
You're not going to get all night long.
Can you exclusively use renewable energies?
Batteries?
Off-grid?
Yeah,
I mean,
but it's too
not a
expensive.
diesel generator? Is there something there?
Well, in my opinion, a good clean diesel generator is far more green than running batteries. Even the best battery technology is really bad for the environment because the life cycle of a battery is relatively low, and the industrial impact to the earth and manufacturing batteries is pretty high. So if you're running a really efficient little Kubota generator on biofuel, that's going to be your lowest carbon footprint, environmental footprint to the earth, in my opinion. That's the way to do it. You supplement that for sure with sun, with batteries, in a smart way. That's a whole nother conversation, a whole nother set of professionals to advise on how to set that up. But that costs money. The realistic way is a little gas-powered Honda. That's probably what most people are going to do. Spill a little gas now and then when they fill it up.
And how loud is it? I
They're
remember
super
that being
quiet. Little ones are quiet, but you know, it costs money. You know, inexpensive generators like from Harbor Freight are super noisy. A lot of people use those. So it depends on
I think Humboldt put, I can't remember what the limit was.
Decibel.
Level. Was it 60?
Yeah, that sounds about right.
That was one of the early issues people had.
To measure the decibels, but that could be doable, I suppose. That's a code enforcement project, I guess. But yeah, that's reasonable. Most modern generators are, you know, the data supplied with them is decibel ratings. So you can put that in there, I think, as a reasonable requirement. 60 decibel range is like stock off the shelf noise for a good generator. And then you can also, it's how you place it, that's huge, you know. Point the muffler across the canyon at your neighbor. You're not going to hear it, but you hear it from 1,000 feet away, you know, so.
Well, it's kind of
Intelligent placement.
It's kind of the same thing with the aluminums going out. It's the way you present your muffler.
Hide it behind a tree so you don't see it, but then it goes.
Yeah, so, you know, we'll still have your basic nuisance rules, right? You can't interfere with your neighbor's quiet enjoyment. The issue is you might not have a very nearby neighbor and you're just interfering with the quiet enjoyment of, you know, wildlife. And so it's hard. There's no complaint-driven process for that. But what about like wind? What about a wind turbine? I mean, is there?
Yeah, that's a way to, yeah, you could power lights. It's just too intermittent to be considered a reliable source of power. But yeah, off-grid power systems can include wind.
The regulations have a rule
battery.
that by 2023, you have to be using renewables at some level consistent with something from your local power company. And
Isn't that just for indoor cultivation? Does that apply for everything? I'm pretty sure that was just for the indoor cultivation permits, but I could be wrong.
I don't recall.
Okay. The concern is where you're using artificial light exclusively to grow plants, which is like the biggest shame in the world, I think. Right. That's a throwback to the illegal days, you know, that's where that all came from. And so it's a way to discourage a way of farming that's very uneconomical and is a huge environmental disaster.
So is there, is it the feeling of the working group that no rules really are necessary for energy use? There's going to be some in the regs. And
I like the
there's-
decibel thing, if that's doable and functional and doesn't burden code enforcement too much. That would be good. Something quantifiable to complain about. Generator, so with the state, up at a certain point, it's big. I think it's up, you get up to 50 kilowatt generator. Then you get into emissions requirements. You have to have a modern tier 4 piece of equipment if you're over 50 kilowatts, but that's a huge generator. I wouldn't mind seeing if also possible to have some equipment requirements at a smaller scale, because we're not going to see generators of that size for what we're talking about. And that's where it gets uneconomical.
Yeah, and what you're talking about, Tier 4 engines are relatively new and more modern, and they require the DEF urea fluid as well as
considered
diesel.
Cleaner burning.
Yeah, and
But
I actually think they're a step backwards, not forwards.
Considered.
You know, they're now out there over a certain size horsepower.
Yeah.
Not.
So I wouldn't mind seeing like if somebody's going to run a big diesel generator, like the old ones are noisy and gross. I don't know.
Okay.
So let me, I just wanted to kind of touch, I'm going back to Linda's comment about the environment and everything. Just to put everything back in context for all of us. You know, there's a lot of rules and regulations that are already inherently locked into the system when it comes to water quality, anything, right? And a lot of different agencies that have an opinion and an opportunity to weigh in on these licenses and permits that we're talking about. And our job here is, right, to try to brainstorm and think outside of the normal regulation that we currently have, and you know, what may we be stepping into the future, and try to head some of that off. And so, you know, just kind of putting that back in context so we don't spend too much time going backwards. And I don't know that we are right now. I think we're doing fine. We're just kind of reminding everybody where we're at.
That reminds me, maybe we should put this one on rest and tackle a couple of the other agenda items.
Well, I need to get out of here a little early.
Yeah.
There's the swearing in is at 12 today.
Oh.
Yep.
But I do want to talk about Heidi knows what I'm talking about. I can't think of any words right now.
The item 1, we're talking about the amending the ordinance.
Yeah, yes. I think we may have accidentally created a monopoly for Robert
And adding C2.
in adding C2.
Yeah, so the setbacks, the distance between adding C2. Now, I thought that we had, now C2, is that the neighborhood commercial, or that's C1? I thought we had C2. When I read the ordinance, C2, C3, C4 is retail. So did I misread that? It's not?
I thought it was 2, but Heidi said it wasn't.
What?
C2?
I thought it was just C3 and C4.
Okay.
But does someone have a copy of the ordinance? Did you,
No.
It's on my computer. When I read it, I could have swore retail was C, that one, and in our working group, I can't hear you. Our discussions included C2, and it was when it came to manufacturing was allowed in
well, that would be a
C4,
little
but not
embarrassing
growing.
if it was in C2, but I thought it was in just C3 and C4
Is C2 also called neighborhood commercial?
because you had a copy of the ordinance.
Retail, we're talking about retail? Okay, and is C2 called neighborhood commercial also?
No, that's C1, which
Okay,
is
so I
very
remember
limited.
our working group discussions, we talked, okay, what about C1, neighborhood commercial? That was off the table. And then C2, I believe, was supposed to be allowed for retail along with C3, C2, and
Well,
and then
okay, well,
manufacturing was allowed in C4.
Do you recall which date that the board approved that? I could go and bring that.
June 13th, we talked about C2, C3, C4, and I've got a question mark on C2.
I think November 13th would have been final approval.
I thought that was, oh, for the,
That would have
for the
been,
retail.
yeah, introduction of cultivation and approval of retail manufacturing.
I'll get that really quickly here.
I remember we talked about it. I don't
So
remember,
retail, manufacturing.
I don't remember where we landed, but I also can't think of a reason why
All right.
C2 shouldn't be on the table.
On May 30th, we said C2, no, all zones. That was
May
us.
30th?
May 30th, 5:30.
That's pretty early in the process.
If it's not,
Yeah.
it seems like it could be. It was, the neighborhood commercial was out, but it seemed like when we were looking at the maps, it was part of the red zones that we were looking at. And then, yeah, this 1,000 feet apart was definitely for a density thing, and that may, and it may turn out that that has to be adjusted. There was also something in the, it's not related to retail, but manufacturing. I could have swore that in our ordinance, we have that down as 1,000-foot setback from schools and such for manufacturing, and I don't remember that being part of our discussions. Originally, we were talking about no setbacks when we were thinking that the state didn't require one. But the state does have their suggested setback of 600 feet like everything else, all beer licenses. But I think that should be reduced for manufacturing. There's no reason for a manufacturing operation at 1,000-foot setback.
We can. The only thing I remember is that we had no setback between manufacturers.
Sure, that makes sense. And then the 1,000-foot setback for retail, the way that came out was that was because we were trying to make a smaller setback for medical. And so the compromise was, okay, if we're going to have this smaller setback for medical, then let's have the larger setback for recreational, you know, partly in our effort to reduce density and such. And then after we had already sent that off and the board decided they didn't want to have that medical exception, and we never really talked about it again. And I think we should have reestablished the setback. If we're going to have one setback for everything, it shouldn't be 1,000 feet. It should be something closer to the state standard. I think the only reason we got up to 1,000 feet was because we were trying to do this 550 for medical. And that we were more like at 800 if we were going to have one size fits all. And that was sort of the compromise. We bumped up the rec to bring down the medical. So that also would address the issues you're talking about of eliminating available spaces because the setbacks are too large from schools and between them. So it may at some point go closer to the state standards.
Well, does the working group want to make that
C2
recommended change?
C2, C3, C4.
C2, C2's in there.
Yeah.
Sorry about that. It is okay. C2, C3, C4, and M.
Well, have we kind of gone through with a ruler and figured out, is the difference between 1,000 and 600 relevant for manufacturing? Are there schools or parks eliminating space at 1,000 that wouldn't at 600?
I don't think we know yet. I think the purpose is just to be, I mean, who knows? Nothing's getting through the planning commission anyway, so it don't matter. But it's all kind of theoretical.
Derek?
Crappy little map, just a hand copy with little circles drawn for
Around
1,000.
the city area or the whole county?
No, this is the
Urban area.
Urban area.
The combining district.
And basically, we took just 1,000 feet from schools, which I think is, I thought 1,000 feet was a state regulation.
600.
600? Okay, and then 1,000 feet from Wonder Stump down here. And even if we did the math the other day, even if you reduce the 1,000 to, okay, to 350.
What's Wonderstone?
That's the name of Robert's business on 101.
Oh, you're talking about between stores.
Well, yeah, there's the two issues, and when you combine them, basically that was the monopoly creation. And if you go from Wonder Stump up to the little tobacco place, the place that used to be Chuck's PC, that's 350 feet. We just measured that the other day.
Yeah.
And so even reducing that to 6 would still make all of these areas outlawed along 101.
Yeah, that was the point, kind of that.
And the problem is, or one of the problems is, that if you go to the areas that are allowed in the south part of town, that's actually on a power line road and it's forest. It's not, it's not a building you can rent.
Yeah. And what we didn't realize at the time, there was actually, from the last time I spoke with you, there was one piece of property that was zoned commercial that is actually outside of the coastal zone, and Robert submitted a use permit for it also, for a retail business.
So we gave him the 2 spots.
Well, he doesn't have anything now. He has filed applications for his Wonder Stump location and his former location at the corner of Howland Hill and Elk Valley.
And so some of this is going to open up when the coastal commission certifies the ordinance. Some of it.
Yeah.
Some of these problems will go away.
Yeah, but what Derek said is correct in that some of the areas that have the C4 or those zonings, especially in the Elk Valley area, are in areas that do have some issues, the second tier, third tier behind Elk Valley Road, coastal issues.
Sure, yeah, that's a huge, I mean, it's not to say there aren't a lot of available spaces, but you're right, the industrial park that's carved out by Delaware County is largely undevelopable.
So the long and short of it is that most of the theoretically available areas are then practically not available.
Yeah, that was sort of the bulk of our discussion over the many, many months that we went around the retail thing was you know, how to limit how many there are in a way without just picking a number and forcing that in some way.
And we were thinking that 3, 5 was appropriate.
So
we weren't really thinking that Robert would get 2 of them though. But
why not? He already had to. I mean, it's not.
That shouldn't matter today.
well, yeah. So what we did do is you have to disclose the ownership and other ownership stakes and other permits when you do. And so the planning commission can say, I guess.
They're not going to approve any of them.
No, but they.
Yeah.
There's a layer.
Take advantage of this microphone here.
There's a layer after the planning commission. This will all go to the board.
So, Derek, you're kind of leading up to a concern and a suggestion. Can you?
Well, and I also just want to say explicitly that I'm sorry I didn't participate earlier. This is beyond anybody's control. My mom died in November, and I was her sole caretaker through cancer. So my life was crap.
Sure.
But in any case, yeah, the concern is now that we know C2 is open, that helps some. But my concern is that it might be kind of fun to just sit down with a higher quality map and take a little compass and then actually figure out if you say you want to have 3 to 5 or 3 to 4 or 3 or however many you want, it might be nice to actually figure out how many are possible, which is sitting down with a map, compasses, and sitting down with 5 maps so we can mess them up.
We did that to some degree with lots of circles and maps. We spent a huge amount of time actually.
I'd just like to say that your idea of fun's different than mine.
So I think that we did, and there was some technical limitations to being able to do that, and it was each individual or potential entrepreneur or whatever had the opportunity to do exactly what you're talking about. And I think it was beyond the capacity of staff to be able to generate lots of maps. It was beyond our capacity, our time to be able to go.
I think you have to really know, like, specifically which properties
are
really suitable. Like if you went around and knew really well where could cannabis really, like, as a business function, and then drew lines between them.
Yeah.
Maybe we should have done that.
Let me give you a serious answer. If you want to do that and kind of further expand that research, because we did a lot of mapping in the beginning, a year ago roughly, and it was in a different context, and then eventually we got to this, the distribution or retail or whatever, and at that point we were really wanting to not cluster it, but kind of
spread it out a bit
and spread it out. Make one on the North County, maybe Southern Town, and Hiuchi or something, right? And so we weren't wanting to have a lot of dispensaries clustered here in town. So that's one of the general goals in the beginning. But you bring up a good point. We didn't go to the detail that says, okay, there's only 2 or 3 allowed here in the community, and gee, one guy might have them all. That's not what we were wanting. So,
but we welcome that info and that input. We're all just, like, as a project in general, short on resources, and so having as much help and input to create those kinds of maps that are more specific so that we can look at them and the process can adjust that's helpful, I think.
And we're trying to do general guidelines, parentheses, not detail.
So in a practical sense, if I get a bunch of maps like this, and then I make little circles on them, just with different, better map than this, but, and then what do I give it to you? Do I give it to you?
I was going to suggest that perhaps you schedule a time to meet with Taylor, our planner, and myself, and maybe we can kind of come up with some methodology on it, and using our GIS software, we might be able to make that happen. So we can do that.
And then she provides updated maps for us, and we look at different ring sizes.
So I would say that...
But you got to also realize we don't know all the intimate details of the individual privately held parcels that may or may not be available.
Well, that was how I got started in this, is that I was talking to David Finnegan, and he came up with, okay, let's do one here. And we looked at the map, it's like, okay, that didn't work. Okay, let's do one here. Okay, that didn't work. And it just, everyone we looked at was not working.
So this is the kind of public input that we didn't have a lot of throughout the whole. We didn't have a lot of the prospective potential entrepreneurs in the various sectors, here participating in that. We had one person on the board here who's interested in retail. I'm interested in cultivation, one other person interested in that, and potentially retail and manufacturing. So the more champions that we have for the different segments, the better ordinances will be able to create. If
my life had not stunk through 2018, I would have been
sure.
happy to do it.
Sure.
So let's set up a meeting within a couple of weeks or something, within the next 2 weeks or something. Great. Perfect.
Cool. Thank you. What's next?
Okay, get going.
Okay.
Anything else on the agenda?
No,
We can talk about hemp without you, I guess.
Oh yeah, you can talk about him without me.
Okay.
Thank you, Joel.
Talk about it.
We did the review of the ordinances. Are we making another meeting? You want to be part of that schedule?
Yeah, next meeting, we used to do weekly, 2 weeks, monthly.
We spreading this out more now? Because
Yeah, I mean, every 2 hours I spend in here is 2 hours not
I
writing.
know you said that last time, like you're trying to make us feel bad for wasting your time.
No, it's just, I think honestly, let's hear what the board does tomorrow and says, and then schedule accordingly.
All right, sounds good.
If they're like, yeah, go forward with what you got, and we'll pay for it, we don't need to meet again for another 3 months, 4 months.
Really?
If they say, no, go back to the working group and change it all, then let's call a meeting.
Okay. And we are looking at staking with Mondays, 10 o'clock. And so it'll be in a month or two based on feedback from tomorrow's meeting. Thanks, Joel. So, brain dead. We're going, hemp.
We could talk just for a minute about hemp.
Give us a big picture context of what we're,
Yeah.
what do we, where's our input needed?
The state, well, I'm not sure, but I'll just recap where we are kind of. And then Justin can fill in if I miss or correct me. The state of California has an industrial hemp program. They have an advisory board working group like this one, and they meet sort of once a month. And they're producing regulations for the California registration program that will be overseen by the individual ag departments of each of the state counties. And so the Board of Supervisors doesn't have a lot to do with that program. They can add on a fee schedule, but for the most part, the rules specifically to the region will be set by the local ag department under the regulations created by the state. And it's a really good thing. I think there are a lot of counties that are not moving forward. They're banning it in order to protect their cannabis program. And I think we don't need to do that. We should definitely be being prepared so that as the state regs come forward, we can act quickly and be in the first wave of registration, state county registration for hemp. Yeah, so they have some more work to do. I don't know how many more months it'll be before they have registration available. But it's just something to pay attention to for the ag department and for the board to think about if they want to add an additional fee schedule to pay for any of the things that the ag department may have to do or add or whatever, questions to be asked about testing. So like I said, the regs aren't out yet in their entirety, so we don't know whose responsibility it will be for the testing. They're trying to decide, and then the protocols for everything. But the basics are there. It's relatively lightly regulated compared to the cannabis industry, and it could be a way for, I mean, hemp can be lots of different things. It's not just a field-grown crop grown with machines for fiber. It can be grown on a small specialty scale. So I think it could be a way for smaller, less well-funded farmers to be able to do something with it without all the burdens and expenses of cannabis regulation.
The current status in California, will it be allowed in the zone at this point because of the new?
I don't know. It's a straight up agricultural product, so I don't really know how the Coastal Commission, I don't think it's treated specially anymore.
Okay.
And then the federal farm bill coming into effect here also changes some things, so I don't know how the state program will adjust to the changes federally, but it's just good news all around in terms of opening up hemp operations. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think you covered quite a bit of it. I don't have a time frame on when all that's going to be worked out. That's a lot of that's happening down in Sacramento. I may know more after I attend the Northern Area Group meeting of commissioners next week. We have a representative on the hemp committee, so we should find out more then, and I can update the group with that. There's a few kind of things that's sticking on right now as far as the fees that are collected. There's probably going to be a $900 state registration fee. How does that get split? What comes to my office? What goes to the state? The testing, like you said, is a major issue at this point. I've heard that industry is pushing to do the testing themselves. Obviously, the commissioners aren't too comfortable with that. I certainly would not be comfortable certifying something that my staff didn't, I should say the sampling rather.
Sure.
You know, that my staff didn't collect the samples, yet we're going to certify that that's accurate. All the commissioners are balking at that. So it's in process. I hope it comes soon, sooner the better. Bobby, when do you need to know this stuff to do anything this year?
In our group, we've got all kinds of things going, but it would be needed to know by probably mid-March to get appropriate seed and appropriate time to plant. But on that program that you say that's available for the state, the California Department of Food and Ag program, and they're the ones that are getting all the rules out, there is a vacancy on that committee if anybody wants to take the time to get more involved in it. They're meeting, like Jesse said, about once a month in Sacramento. And also there is a NorCal hemp co-op starting in Wairika, and a Southern Oregon hemp co-op starting in Medford. And they're having their first official meeting February 1st over in Medford, Oregon. And I plan to attend that meeting, and so I'll go to that one. But I am not planning on trying to get onto the California State Board that's in Sacramento. It's a non-paid position, but you do get your travel if anybody is interested in that.
So one question I'm trying to figure out, and I still haven't been able to view the last meeting that they had December 12th. They don't have it on their whatever, YouTube or where they post the videos. It's still not up yet. So I'm dying to know where they got their long meetings, like 4-hour meetings. I want to know what they're doing. And so maybe when you talk with the representative there, how they're defining the certified cultivars. That seems to be the timeline that's going to determine when you can either plant or whatever. And that's what's going to take time, is getting this. There is like a certified seed list already, but they're not, you know, they're like industrial hemp. They're like seed and fiber varieties, you know. And how to introduce it. And they have, that's been on the agenda, and they were talked about at the last meeting, and one I haven't been able to see is they're formulating the process for adding new cultivars. And so that's what we want definitely some detail on is, and it's pretty wide open. Option number 5 was, cultivars produced in California. It was like just really broad. And so my question for them, I never did send them, I could have, they accept emails for question that they talk about. There's so little participation that you can get your questions through.
Hey, Jesse, I'll tell you what, if you want to email me the exact questions you have,
Okay.
I think I can pass them to, so
Okay.
Rick Garola is the commissioner for Tehama County. He's our northern representative. I can liaise with him
Okay.
and probably get you some answers.
Okay, yeah, I'll get that kind of more formulated, but that'd be the biggest thing, is if we could quickly certify varieties that we have already, then we can get moving. So one of the new changes is you can use propagated material. It's not just seeds anymore, so you can use cuttings. So if there's a fast track way to get cuttings certified, for example, I have cuttings already I've been working with for years, a particular plant that I believe will meet the regulations below 0.3% THC, and I would like to know how to get that certified, or how anybody would get that certified. We have crops produced from it that are lab tested, and I just can't, there hasn't been much discussion about that, so I'll email that to you. Thanks, Justin.
And then, Justin, I think also it would be helpful if you could just collect a handful of bullet points, information for us, for this working group, that outlines maybe where we are in the state with the whole process of hemp. If you could do that, that would be helpful. I don't want a 2-page report, but something that's a half page or something.
No, I
cool.
get what you're coming from. It's
Okay.
a synopsis.
Yeah, thank you.
And Justin, I'd like to be on that list when you give it to Jesse too, on how they get certified and who would be certified. I know you and I have talked, and you've given me a list of the seed people, but none of them are certified to come into California because it just became legal.
Right.
All of those are available. I can go to Medford and pick all that up, but can I bring it to California, and is that legal? You
Yeah,
know?
yeah, they're working on that process now. That's what they're trying to decide. And so, yeah, that seems like the time crunch. That's the first thing that has to happen.
And that came up with even the Chinese people that are doing seeds. The Chinese people that we had been talking to about bringing seeds in. They can bring them into the United States, and they can go to Colorado and Oregon and Washington, but they can't come to California yet.
Yeah, that's on the list too. That's one of them, is how to bring in the international ones, how to bring in the ones from other states that have programs. And, yeah, so they have the list of 5 different ways they're going to do it.
And it's not only seeds, like you say, it is the
Seeds and
propagated
material,
yeah.
tissue cultures, cuttings. That was the big change that happened at the state level.
And the propagated part would be a lot easier because it's already started for you, so.
And it's known.
Yeah.
It's not a unknown.
It's
maybe.
Yeah, it's known in testing to be at a certain
Yeah.
quality.
That's what's going to be the key thing, I think, in the beginning is the liability of making sure your crop doesn't go hot, have to be destroyed, and that's where uniform fields of cuttings are going to work well in the beginning.
Along that lines, I guess I have a comment to what you said about 10 minutes ago in regards to the certified testing that you may be required to do, but you're not sure, maybe, I think I heard you say, about the collection of the sample.
Right.
And certainly, from my practical point of view, I would think that would be a must. We on the concerned side, or you need, representing the people, need to be out pulling the sample. We
Well, the other
can't-
states are like that too.
They're also very undetermined or undecided on when that sample is to be obtained.
Yes.
Is it
Yeah.
obtained in the first 30 days, or 60
Yeah.
or 90? And of course, toward the end would be probably the most proper.
Yeah, the
Because that's
best,
when
right.
you're about ready to use it. And
A lot of that stuff's not clear, and the state law is very open, and they give a lot of latitude to this Industrial Hemp Advisory Board. And whatever they say just goes to the Secretary of State. They check it for legal accuracy, and it becomes law. They have a lot of leeway. And so things like that the the testing procedure, that's hugely important. When, how is it tested, how is it blended, how many plants, how much of the plant, what part of the plant, all those
Yeah.
things, who's
Maybe,
testing. So-
maybe we need to offer our working group services to the state board.
Well, if I'm
Go
saying
ahead,
there's a
get it
vacancy,
done.
there we go.
There is a vacancy.
So yeah, that covers it with the main. I just wanted to make sure that we don't fall behind on this one, you know, with the cannabis, you know, we weren't in the beginning, and that's fine. That's who we are and where we are. But with hemp, I think we have an opportunity to be in the forefront with it and not to miss the opportunity.
Well, another big question mark at this point too is, does the board have any intention to ban or restrict it? I would guess they probably wouldn't ban it, but are they going to restrict it? I haven't heard anything on that front yet, so.
Yeah, I haven't heard
I
anything.
don't have an opinion.
I haven't heard any interest of them wanting to do that. Although you're going to see cannabis on 101 potentially with hemp, so that would be the only thing I could think of. I might not want it.
Well, I do know that I can tell you, Justin, that we had a meeting. I see Blake's brought my book here from our meeting last year about this time. I think it was February. And you weren't at it, but your secretary was, I believe. But anyhow, we had about 15 different representatives of Smith River farmers, or Valley farmers, and the Smith River tribe. And at that time, there was about 250 acres of people that wanted to attempt to try it for the first year. And since then, I've been contacted by numerous other people, and it would be up to closer to 750 acres of people, and that's not including once we get started.
Yeah, you're going to have to hire a few people, I think.
Yeah. Well, no, that's encouraging, though. I think it's a crop with a lot of potential for Del Norte County.
Excellent.
Okay,
Right on
wow,
time.
it's 12 o'clock. We started a few minutes late, so if there's anything we need to wrap up on, we can leave less guilty. Any other comments? We're good.
Well, I just want to say, and members of the public, if there's anyone that wants to weigh in on hemp or any other issue, just come get my card from me or talk to me after the meeting. I can stick around for a few minutes.
I have one. This is a question for Joel, and I'm going to take advantage of the mic, and I forget that I'm, have this internet
Presence.
Yes, this internet bully pulpit. And so, what I wanted to ask Joel was, so when somebody submits an application for a use permit to the county, and then we know that the planning commission will deny it, and then your next recourse is to go to the board of supervisors. So your use permit fee, that sort of went up in smoke already because the planning commission denies it. And then the way the ordinance is written, it's the cost of staff time falls on the applicant when it goes to the board of supervisors. And my question was, is that cost come regardless of whether or not the board approves your permit, or only if they deny it?
That would be regardless, because the
Okay.
cost is incurred. And I can't recall particularly for the ordinance, but if it's like most planning permits, if the planning commission denies it, then there is a single appeal fee that is paid upstairs, and
Okay.
it's a small fraction of what the permit is.
Oh, okay.
Unless there's something specific
I
that
thought
was
Joel
done
was
that-
saying something about there was some point at which all of the staff time, by the time, if you're going to the board, then it's a new game, and then all the staff time that goes into the project gets accumulated and billed to you, whatever it
Okay.
is.
I guess maybe we
That's
should
what I wanted
defer
to
to
ask
him on
Joel,
that,
yeah.
because
Okay.
typically on most.
Okay, so it's a fee.
And I'm thinking like, say, a use permit for an overhead accessory building, the neighbors
Okay.
show up, it gets denied, then the landowner appeals it, goes to just a,
Okay. So I just wanted to be clear, I will ask Joel, and that understanding the system that we have is sort of
because if that's the
interesting.
case, then I would think administration, who has the fee for the appeal, would need to have that special in their fee schedule. And I don't think that currently exists, and I'm unaware of it being planned.
Okay,
So it's probably a timely question.
okay.
Okay, any closing comments here up
Just our next date.
Yeah, and I was just going to remind everyone that we're waiting to get a little feedback from tomorrow, tomorrow's Board of Supervisors meeting, and then we will determine whether we're going to meet roughly in 30 days or 60 days or somewhere in between. Again, it will be 10 o'clock on a Monday. We do know that. So thank you all for coming, and thank you.
Thank you.